America, we've been asleep too long. Fill the holes, close the loops, right the wrongs now. Corporations, they pay no taxes. We're losing jobs while their profits be maxing. Yeah, no backing down, there's no retreat. Yeah, we gonna take back our street.
The Syrian civil war began in March 2011 as an extension of the Arab Spring movement. Initially, it was a series of protests against the regime of President Bashar al-Assad. By June of 2012, rebels threatened to capture Damascus, had killed several government officials, and inspired others to defect from the government. By the time the chemical weapons attacks occurred in August, approximately 100,000 people had died, with very little notice being taken of the carnage. In September, world involvement was averted through diplomatic means and an agreement by Syria to identify and destroy its stores of deadly chemicals. What went underreported since then was that weapons are in fact being destroyed. The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons inspected 21 of the 23 facilities identified as containing weapons. The remaining 2 pose safety or security concerns, although Syria claims those sites are abandoned. The joint OPCW and UN mission witnessed the destruction of the means of production of Syria's chemical weapons. Phase 2 occurs on November 15th, when a detailed plan for the destruction of the actual chemicals is due. Closer to home, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was designed to overcome the resistance of some states to enforce the 15th Amendment to the Constitution. That, of course, is the one that declares the right of U.S. citizens to vote regardless of race. It was amended several times over the decades to address poll taxes and gerrymandered districting. Since 2012, though, 18 states have passed restrictive voter laws, and in June of this year, the Supreme Court ruled that the Voting Rights Act's purpose had been fulfilled. It struck down the heart of the law that required the old Confederacy to seek the approval of the Attorney General or Congress before changing their election laws, a concept known as preclearance. About 2 hours after the decision, Texas announced it would implement the law previously blocked by Congress. Mississippi followed later that day. South Carolina, Alabama, and Virginia all have passed laws that preclearance couldn't stop now. North Carolina and Florida announced planned reforms. Arkansas, which was not even subject to Section 5, passed and will soon implement voter registration reforms. Texans are already experiencing the law of unintended consequences. Although the legislation was designed to primarily exclude those who earn less than $50,000 per year and who tend to vote Democratic, some very prominent Texans have been inconvenienced, including a district court judge who had been voting under her hyphenated name for 52 years, gubernatorial candidates Wendy Davis and Greg Abbott. Davis is a state senator. Abbott, in his role as state attorney general, filed an amicus brief in the Supreme Court case and announced Texas' intention to proceed with the same voter ID law that has now impacted him. And former House Speaker Jim Wright. Wright is 90 years old and allowed his driver's license to expire in 2010. His faculty ID is not an acceptable form of ID. His assistant obtained a certified copy of his birth certificate, for which there is a fee. That amounts to a poll tax. Many Texans don't have the resources to overcome these obstacles thrown in their paths. Some would have to drive 250 miles in order to obtain proper ID, and can't. Women and the elderly, as well as poor and minority would-be voters, will be disenfranchised by this law and those implemented in other states. Incidentally, the incidence of fraud nationally Know of any underreported news that deserves attention? Write to us through the Send Message button under the About tab on this YouTube channel. Give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and stay tuned.
America, we've been asleep too long. Fill the holes, close the loops, right the wrongs now. Corporations,